Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Anna, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Thank you for taking time to join us today. For those who may not be familiar with Cyfirma, we are an external threat landscape management company focusing on using predictive intelligence to help organizations be better prepared against emerging threats. The work from our cyber research team ensures customers from across all industries are always a step ahead of cyber adversaries, and we help customers monitor their digital risk profile so remedial actions can be implemented early before an attack occurs. The Cyfirma researchers uncovered multiple instances of hackers looking to collaborate on exploiting Hikvision cameras using a critical vulnerability that was first discovered last year. The research findings reviewed over 80,000 cameras at risk. We have here today Saurabh, who heads up Cyfirma research team, to share the details of the report. Over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What a bright sunny day here it is in Singapore, and I'm here going to be walking you through our research report and finding around Hikvision. It's a very popular brand, globally implemented across multiple countries, organizations for personal, institution, and organizational consumption. And a very important set of research that was done and carried out by Cyfirma researchers. Of course, as you can see a little bit about Cyfirma, we are an external threat landscape management company, and we pride ourselves to be working for the betterment of our clients, customers, and the wider society to make it a freer world and a safer world. Now, a little bit around escalating cybercrime, and this is important to set the context. We all need to understand why there are so many cyber attacks happening. What is the what are the stats around cybercrime? You know, any data breach typically has a cost of around $4.24 million attributed to it, and these numbers are only going up. Cybercrime is an economy on its own. There are numerous entrants entering this space on a daily basis, and we have seen that in excess of 63% of cybercrimes are continuing to be financially motivated, where an average cost of a breach can very easily exceed 400 billion, which is just a very conservative number. And if you have to understand how organizations are tracking it, they're only spending $2.5 grand annually on security per employee. Employee being part of the human chain, which at times can be the weakest link in your cybersecurity posture, given that they can click a link or they can go to a website and not understand it's dubious or not. We all need to understand better how this spend can be better managed and be more effective. What we have also identified, which we keep telling to the wider community as well as to our clients and customers, that there are only two stages in cybersecurity. One, you are hacked and you know, and two, you are hacked and you do not know. And one of the things around a hack is quite many times a breach. And it can take so many days, as you can see, 212 days is just a simple number, but time taken to realize a breach has happened. And by that time, your data, your intellectual property, your crown jewels might be out there. And they would have already changed so many hands and contributed to the overall cybercrime. What we have also identified, and this is based on, cyber criminals and hackers we track, almost 800 of them, more than 800 of them, and almost more than 2,000 campaigns or operations which are being executed by cyber crime groups, is that there has been a marked uptick in the number of state-sponsored attacks, which means attacks being carried out to address the geopolitical aspirations of state-sponsored masters. Gone are the days that we used to think that governments and institutions and agencies won't be targeted. You can see the numbers out there. They are heavily targeted, and the concept of carpet bombing is still there, but there are now an increased number of targeted attacks, which means cyber criminals spend a lot of time planning in trying to identify their target and trying to understand and validate and execute a plan of attack, a method of attack, a path of attack. And many of these are also continue to be commercial organizations because it's all around an idea. It's all around a data. It's all around their customers, and they have very big things to lose if obviously they are targeted, and that's where they are susceptible to paying ransom, in spite of not paying ransom, not confirming that their breaches will be contained. Ransomware is a menace, so is phishing, so is malware, but we have also seen deepfake, which we anticipate will be taking over phishing. So it's very important to understand that cybercrime is escalating. And that is why research reports like the one we have published, which is one of the many, is quite important in trying to understand the state of the nation when it comes to the cybercrime economy and the contributing factors toward it. Now, before we build up into the report, we wanted to touch base on the specific areas of IoT, IIoT, right? We estimate that by end of this year, we'll have almost 15 billion connected devices. And that number is going to exponentially increase to 27 billion. Various number of use cases, whether it is B2B, B2C, OT, IT, you name it, they're occurring out there. Now, together with the rise of cellular IoT devices, at least in the developed countries like Singapore, Americas, Europe, you see a marked trend around it, and the developing countries are now starting to add to the bandwagon of 5G being rolled out. We all understand as experts in this space, what you can do in 5G propels the functionality being presented to the users, but also presents a very huge opportunity to cyber criminals. Just understand it very simply, right? Downloading GBs of data can happen in a matter of minutes, if not seconds, which means it presents to cyber criminals an equal opportunity of carrying out more sinister level of attacks and carrying out, adding more flavors to their attack because of the strength of 5G, which basically means the footprint of potential access points for cyber criminals is going to grow dramatically. It's going to be spread across smart homes, offices, industrial deployments, everywhere. So the footprint has just gone expanded immensely. Now, while legislation, standards, certifications, they might be coming in 22 and beyond, it still remains a wild west, as we call a terminology in the cyber world in this regard. And which means that, many of those IoT and IoT devices or implementations, they will end up, or they already lack basic cybersecurity controls. And we'll understand the trend a little bit more, right? If you look at some of these stats that we are able to see, that we are able to comprehend, or the trends we have seen, several devices were actually added without adequate testing for vulnerabilities. And the research report on Hikvision is a very simple and a clear example around it. Because those implementations are not addressing, or they do not actively address inherent security concerns. And this is not only in implementing standalone systems, but this also, more importantly, quite relevant when it comes to convergence with legacy OT environments. Now, as new cases emerge, and they emerge by the hour, not even by the day, IoT and IoT landscape or implementation is actually making deep roads or inroads into new verticals, both within the OT and IT applications, which means this is even a larger opportunity for cyber criminals to really build upon. Now, what are they after? Well, it's all after in trying to make inroads, and of course, more importantly, it's about the data, right? Because more data from such projects or such implementations is making its way into data dumps across various channels. And data is the new currency, ladies and gentlemen, in the cyber world, in today's world. It's all about the data that is out there. The data is accessible, is available, more data is being collected, which means more things to look out for, more things to protect, which means the moment one of those dumps goes out, it just adds headache to organizations and institutions. Now, technology at the edge is increasing, where the processing of data out to where it is required provides very clear business benefits, which also means it's increasing the expanse and processing of the business data, which adds to the security aspects or security considerations, which need to be really thought through well. If you do not have the right cybersecurity controls, if you do not have the right implementations, if you do not do a right selection of the partner who's doing this implementation or the right product, it's all going to add to your cybersecurity risks, which are nowadays a very clear conversation even at the board level. And we are all aware of the chip shortages, right? You've seen what is happening in some of the chip manufacturing. You've seen very clear trend in automobile manufacturers and manufacturing industry really facing shortages, which adds to the to the issues here or to the risk, wherein manufacturers are forced to buy dubious, less secure, and even potentially backdoor chips from unproven sources because they have uh, they have pressure to meet their targets for their shareholder value, and to build up their to build up and continue to build up their market share and fight the competition. All these, ladies and gentlemen, are adding to what we are going to talk a little bit now in the next slide around our research report. So what we did was, and we continue to see trends around, such implementations and such products. We have delivered such research reports also in the past. So what we did was we took a very simple use case, and nothing against the manufacturer, but it was just a simple use case because it's being heavily implemented out there. We took a sample of 285,000 devices implemented, and we did a deep analysis on it. We did a lot of correlation attribution, and we were shocked to find out that almost 80,000 in greater of 80,000 Hikvision cameras, which are still being utilized by corporates, individuals, institutions, government institutions, data center implementations, you name it, right? They're still vulnerable to some of the vulnerabilities which were, listed out as early as 2021. Advisories being sent out in October 21 and February 22. They're still vulnerable out there. And the vulnerabilities go into the product line, which or models of this brand from as early as 2016. So those models are still vulnerable because it's a very clear vulnerability out there. Now, having vulnerabilities out there is one thing. It's part and parcel because, of course, the technology continues to improve, which means there are increased number of gaps being identified by cyber criminals, which can be exploited. But what was a very clear trend identified is that multiple instances of hackers were looking to collaborate on exploiting these cameras using a very clear vulnerability, the CV 2021 36260 globally. So it is a very clear, set of conversations we were able to identify, wherein there is an increased number of interests out there in the cyber criminal world or the hackers world, wherein they find this as something just sitting there waiting to be exploited. Now, specifically, in the Russian forums, we observed on top of the vulnerabilities, leaked credentials of these camera products available for sale. So you have vulnerabilities which can be exploited. You now also have leaked credentials which can be utilized or leveraged by hackers to basically gain access to the devices and exploit them further to establish a path of attack and target the wider organization's environment because they're not after the cameras, they're after the crown jewels. And vulnerable products like this, vulnerable implementations like this just add to the porous attack surface, ladies and gentlemen, which can be leveraged and utilized, by the hacker. Because upon compromising this IP camera, they can attackers, as I mentioned, can very easily use these hack devices to access internal networks, which is a very clear risk to the infrastructure and to the crown jewels. And these exploitations, right, they really don't require user interactions. The attacker only needs to access the HTTP or HTTPS ports. That's it. Now, it is important for us to understand that, I mean, the vulnerabilities are there, the leaked credentials are there, but there are also a set of non-standard ports which are present, which are a pertinent risk to the organization. We were shocked to identify that in addition to 80 and 443, there were so many non-standard ports out there, which most likely are either not monitored or not managed adequately, which adds to the porous entry points within the organization, right? Now, if you look at all these three data points, ladies and gentlemen, look at the kind of risk this presents. Now, given the deployment of these cameras at potentially sensitive sites, which is why they are primarily being utilized, forget the B2C kind of an implementation, and potentially sensitive sites in terms of critical infrastructure also, they're all at risk because no username or password needed or any action is needed to be initiated by the camera owner. It will not be detected by any logging on the camera itself. You'll be surprised in many implementations out there, right? These implementations are carried out by third party. These implementations are managed by third parties, and organizations, institutions, agencies are not even aware what the third party is doing with this implementation. How are they managing these kind of implementations, right? Uh, so it's a classic case of trying to implement something to get the business outcomes, but not having the right monitoring in place, not understanding how your external threat landscape is changing, wherein there is a lot of heightened interest around these entry points. And we're running around all the places looking inwards within our parameters, not knowing that there is an entry point already out there which is exposed. So let's look at what is the overall impact landscape, right? And these are not small numbers, ladies and gentlemen. And please remember, this is just a small sample. If I'm not wrong, the overall global implementation of Hikvision cameras is going to be touching 5 million, if not more. So already 100 plus nations are seen to be impacted. And we'll share some stats with you on what is the implementation around organizations. There are at least 80,000, in excess of 80,000 devices still vulnerable when the report was published. In excess of 2,300 organizations are impacted. Many of these implementations, many of these camera models, they're not something that has been implemented just recently. They've been there for months and years. And if you just look at the non-standard ports, almost more than 450 non-standard ports were very clearly identified. Now, if you do not have the right set of controls while implementing, this is going to be a recipe for disaster. And cyber criminals or threat actors can use these entry points to establish persistence and possibly utilize this to run away with your crown jewels or probably launch the next set of attacks. If you validate the overall impact landscape, right, and this is just top 10 nations which have been utilizing this camera product. Not surprisingly, you do have the biggest geographies, China and US, topping up the charts. But look at some of the other numbers, at least when you look at Vietnam, UK, Ukraine, Thailand, South Africa, France, Netherlands, Romania. The numbers are quite startling. And the implementations in all these countries, they're not necessarily all private implementations. They are implementations in institutions. They are implementations in organizations, which is quite alarming because an incorrect implementation or an incorrect maintenance of these implementations or incorrect validation of third-party ecosystem, which is managing these implementations and monitoring these, can lead to a very simple entry point being exploited by cyber criminals for their gain. And the biggest gain in today's scenario is the ongoing brewing geopolitical as well as corporate espionage after your crown jewels, you name it. Let's look at the overall external threat landscape attribution. So we have identified very clear facts. There are clear vulnerabilities. There are clear non-standard ports out there. There are credentials which are leaked out there, which are just waiting and being transacted. There's enough interest in the cyber criminal, ecosystem in trying to collaborate around exploiting these vulnerabilities. We have seen very specific trends wherein we feel we believe that APT41, APT10, and their affiliates, as well as various unknown Russian threat actor groups, could be interested in exploiting this. Now, for those who are on the call who do not know what are some of these cyber criminal names or groups, APT41 group is a very well resourced, highly skilled, creative, agile group, which is very quick, known to quickly adapt to any attempts to target, identify its targets and to target those organizations and institutions, and initiate an infection route, gaining access to their environment, and then possibly stealing some data, and then further enhancing their geopolitical masters' objectives. Now, APT41 compromises are typically widespread and very highly persistent, with the group able to, try to take care of the foothold inside networks. They're a very resourceful group, and they're a group not to be messed with. They have been there uh, for many number of years out there. On the other hand, APT41, of course, specializes in gathering intelligence. Now, these are all affiliated to to their particular country, which is China. And APT10 is all about, trying to acquire valuable military intelligence, confidential business intelligence, basically aimed at helping their native Chinese corporations. Now, both these groups are known to target many organizations. We have seen footprint of targeting healthcare, defense, aerospace, government establishments, managed IT service providers, manufacturing organizations, mining organization, educational entities like various well-known universities, to name a few. So in these kind of threat actors, if you are going to give them almost a red carpet of a set of vulnerabilities being exploited on your implemented devices out there, they do not need a second invitation. Now, unknown Russian groups, we have seen trends from a group called TA505, groups called APT28, which is whose call sign is Fancy Bear as well as APT29, which is called Cozy Bear. Now, these groups are believed to have collaboration in infrastructure, and many threat actors, all these that you are seeing listed out there, we track almost 800 of them. You would see a lot of collaboration around infrastructure being utilized. So it's not a scenario that, all right, here is my infrastructure, I'm going to execute a campaign. There are various subgroups within these call signs that we are utilizing. Nobody exactly knows how many subgroups there are. But even within these individual call signs, there is enough collaboration in infrastructure, right? Enough collaboration in the kind of malware they are utilizing or working with various ransomware groups. And it's all about, trying to utilize some of those publicly accessible ransomware, working with the ransomware as a service, hacker as a service kind of a concept, which is where an interesting angle of Groups like Lazarus Group from North Korea also come in, wherein we have seen a lot of trends in them working under RAS or ransomware as a service or HAS, hacking as a service model with some of these groups out there. All these groups, specifically the unknown Russian groups or APT 28, 29, TF505, they are very well resourced. They have the backing of their state masters. They have very clear agenda of gaining any intelligence input, whether it is corporate, whether it is state, whether it is intellectual property, whether it is trying to gain data, trying to understand the behavior around the society to further their state-sponsored geopolitical, outcomes or goals. They are very well established there, and they continue to modulate their tools, techniques, and procedures, what we call in the cybersecurity world as TTPs. They are taking an increasingly adoptive approach in trying to address how best they can gain advantage of a particular situation. And in this case, there are so many cameras out there which are implemented, which are vulnerable, which means it's basically out there, possibly already heavily being exploited. So these threat actors, as we have mentioned out, and you can read the report in detail, could potentially exploit these vulnerabilities in these devices to fulfill their motives. And one of the biggest things that we have seen, or Cyfirma has been seeing for quite some time, is many of these state-sponsored groups are furthering or being utilized as warfare tactics to further their state masters' geopolitical agendas or considerations. Enemy of an enemy is a friend of a friend is a friend, trying to correlate with the RAS model and HAS model so that footprints do not come to the person who has already who has requested that particular attack for whatever reasons, are some of the known considerations. In the current two big geopolitical spats happening, one in Europe and one in Asia, it is quite clear based on the indicators we are seeing, there is heightened amount of activity out there. Can't even comprehend, and the kind of advisories we are able to give to our clients and customers on simple things that we are able to see in terms of things happening on some of their um, external facing assets, the kind of uh, targeted spear phishing attacks happening, the kind of ransomware or malware strains which are being utilized. Many of these are now starting to resort to publicly available strains out there rather than customizable strains, because that then brings the footprint back to them. It's quite alarming, ladies and gentlemen. And definitely a lot of uptick in activity in the cyber criminal space, in the hacking groups, hacker forums. Footprint we are able to see has been due to the ongoing geopolitical scenarios across the world, and it's not going to die. It was not that it was not happening earlier, but the scale of what we are able to see is a lot more. And it is also targeting not only the crown jewels, it's also targeting, the way of life. Imagine if there is a very well-established industry in a particular country. Take any example; it could be any industry out there, and if you are going to target organizations or institutions or research around that industry, it's potentially going to cripple the industry of that country, which means it's going to cripple that society. If you get access to the behavioral data out there and you are able to modulate the behavior of the society by instilling fear or by instilling one particular line of thought, or by instilling a particular uh, thought process. Of lately we have seen a lot of deep fakes being executed out there, a lot of fake news being executed out there. These are the new techniques being utilized by various state-sponsored cyber criminals so that they can cripple a country without even firing a missile or a bullet. Yes, sometimes it's needed to fire them, but a lot is now happening on the wire, on the cyber, and that's why it is important to understand, important to know what is the situational awareness around where you are existing, how you are operating, the geographies you are operating, the industry you are in, what is the geopolitical considerations in and around the area you're operating. And these all tie up, ladies and gentlemen. So as I was explaining earlier, uh, Hikvision is not the only campaign we have been able to unearth over the last many months and year. We have also identified similar campaigns. Now, almost 2,000 operations or campaigns we monitor. We wanted to bring flavor of two of those campaigns which are being observed by Cyfirma. One is obviously known or called as Think Pocket, and I think there are some public references available for that. Most of the other details are specifically relevant and available for the clients who are onboarded on our platform and to whom we protect their, any potential threats or risks coming their way. Think Pocket is a cyber espionage campaign exploiting a very popular connectivity product. So Hikvision campaign is not the first one. And this is a very popular connectivity product, which we very clearly identified for our clients and customers. Industries being targeted. I mean, look at the spread of it, and this is just the tip of an iceberg. Telecommunication, infrastructure, energy, whether it's production or supply. Obviously, defense is always going to be there, so is government. But any and every shape of research, manufacturing, ICT, trading, these are some of the very profound industries being targeted. And the geographies being targeted, of course, start with United States, Japan, but also in the region, Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand, Australia, India, not to mention United Kingdom, and many, many more. There are almost 28 different countries, and there are almost 19 industries which are being targeted. These are just a small snapshot of it. Very clearly identified assets, very clearly identified set of vulnerabilities, articulated clear path of attack, method of attack of how they are planning to exploit this particular connectivity product. Just because of flawed implementation, because of mismanaged or gaps in your tech stack, which means vulnerability obviously is there. Many exploits out there being prevalent in the wild, which can be utilized to launch an attack. And a simple thing, right? It's just a connectivity product, but all you need is an entry point into an organization, an entry point into their network, their infrastructure, and they can do any lateral movement or privilege escalation, and they can do whatever they need. And almost based on clients which were onboarded, we actually gave this advisory to 12 of them, which were all across the industries. Now, that was one. There's another instance, of course, wherein, again, unknown Russian threat actors were observed to be launching a cyber attack campaign, exploiting, in this time, a popular brand of routers. And we picked up in excess of 1,500 such, instances of these implementations. Now, Russian cybercriminal groups are known to be targeting vulnerable devices. And so are the Mission 2025s or APT41 and APT10s and their affiliates of the world. But look at the diversity of industries being targeted. You have chemical industry. I can't even explain if a simple composition in a chemical plant is changed, the ramifications in the kinetic world around it. It can lead to very drastic consequences. You have manufacturing, you have fertilizers, tire, electronic product equipments, healthcare. Healthcare is very important, right? You have healthcare research, you have healthcare supply instruments. Imagine one of those instruments, their calibration is wrong. Or imagine one of those research facilities wherein the temperature controls are, they go haywire, or in an actual, hospital, one of those devices is misconfigured. You can imagine it straight away lead to a loss of life. Shipping, transportation, polymer. It's very easy to take over a ship and try to send it to a different location or send it on a collision course. These are ways how cyber criminals basically utilize to get into the psyche of the corporation, organizations, institutions, and basically try to get an outcome out of it, financial as well as geopolitical. Again, if you look at the geographies, right, being targeted is France, Germany, Ukraine, Japan, Indonesia, UK, India, USA, Taiwan, many more. And again, Taiwan is a very important mention there because it's not there just recently, but they have been at the brunt of receiving many of these for quite some time. So I think we need to understand that given the current geopolitical driven cyber warfare, which is actually brewing across the world, we will always see these suspected upticks in cyber attacks from various nation threat actors. They will start by targeting critical infrastructure, of course, but then they will also target state entities, defense organizations, very known and very clearly identified, corporate brands of that country, and open vulnerabilities and ports in such devices. And we have given you very clear example, a detailed report on Hikvision and some of the other examples it's highlighted, being Pinkpocket and another cyber espionage campaign. Um, you know, open ports and vulnerabilities in these devices can be very easily exploited and will only compound the impact on targeted organizations, institutions, government agencies, which will lead to an impact on their economies and state progress. Now, it is important for all of us to understand what is really brewing out there in the external threat landscape. It's one thing that, yes, we be aware of what are our implementations. We have the right cybersecurity controls, cybersecurity practices, policies, but we also need to tie that up to what's really happening out there, because that's where outside your perimeter is where most of the threats and risks are coming from. We need to understand and take a risk-based approach out there. Now, just wrapping that up, that specific advisory in trying to revalidate that nobody is spared. You can see the target already being CII and OT. You can already see that even SMEs are not being spared, which we have seen in this particular research report. Cybercrime is all about gaining some financial outcome in addition to furthering the geopolitical agenda of their state-sponsored masters. And ransomware groups, threat actors, as we just explained to you, they're always collaborating. They're always looking into naming and shaping. And they want to disrupt anything which is the weakest link. And in this case, supply chain, software supply chain, your third-party ecosystem, and your human link within the organization is the weakest chain. We need to understand why these, what is really the gaps because of these, scenarios which are building out there, and what is the challenges that really governments and businesses are facing, because they really do not have a visibility of their external threat landscape. They have no visibility of their shadow IT, forgotten IT, and a Hikvision camera implementation is a very good example of it. You might sometimes not even know that there's something implemented out there. You might also not know that you have an exploitable digital footprint, because you are always looking inside, trying to manage your cyber posture, and you are not looking from an outside-in perspective. You're not expanding your cybersecurity posture, policies, procedures, frameworks into third-party systems which are connected. And I personally believe that it's also an issue of being event-focused. We're always waiting for an event to happen and then we are going to react. We are not intelligence-driven. And that is very, very important. No contextual detail. You do not even know which cyber criminal, why are they looking into you? What are they interested in you? You do not even understand the who, why, what, when, how of that risk that is originating. The moment you start putting details around, contextual details around all these questions, like who is interested in you? Why are they interested in you? What are they really looking for? When possibly they can launch an attack, from where, and how are they going to launch an attack? Unless these Contextual and personalized and relevant insights are shared with you. Scenarios like vulnerabilities, open non-standard ports, and credentials, even around Hikvision cameras, will just continue to happen because you have so many implementations in your environment. So it's important to go back to the basics. It's important to understand and know your enemy and then know yourself. You need to know how attractive you look from the lens of a hacker. Just the starting points need to be the correlated and attributed viewpoints around attack surface, digital footprint, weaknesses, path of attack, and then mapping that to the external threat landscape powered cyber intelligence. Very clearly telling you all those that you need to know, giving you intelligence around vulnerabilities, giving you intelligence around your brand. What is the risk that your brand is facing? Do you have a real-time understanding of that? Do you have an understanding of how your ecosystem is being impacted, whether it's supply chain or third party? Do you have a very real-time understanding of what are those risks from a digital profile that your organization is facing? It could be impersonations, it could be infringement, it could be data breaches, it could be data leaks. Do you know what is the situation around your industry, geography, your tech stack that you have adopted? Do you know how you should be realigning your cyber posture? How your porous attack surface is being exploited by hackers? And Hikvision report is a very simple example of it. All these will need to you'll need to understand to take proactive actions. You'll need to understand the quantum of the impact. Otherwise, we will have similar scenarios across the landscape in the organization. And if you do not have this understanding, if you do not have a technology-driven real-time view, an intelligence view around this, it becomes difficult. And reports like these, analysis like these, research like these are basically driven based on intelligence insights indicators collected by our platforms, Decipher and Detect. Because it's all about giving you that visibility of threats and risk impacting you, helping you understand the strategic management and tactical layers of intelligence, possibly giving you predictive insights, giving you personalized inputs, presenting to you how lucrative you look from a hacker's perspective, and giving you contextual information. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not about feeding your data from your logs, slicing and dicing that data and presenting it to you in a beautiful looking graph. That is data analytics. It's not intelligence. It's not about you telling me that because it rained yesterday, please carry an umbrella today. That is past data. That's not intelligence. It's also not about, me heading out there in the ocean and carrying all my instrumentations with me when I know I'm not an expert. It should be left to the experts. It should be left to the technology to present to you very clearly what are those predicaments that are coming from a cybersecurity standpoint, because it's a connected world out there, especially after the pandemic. All the systems are connected. There's convergence between IT and OT. There's convergence. There is a digital transformation that is happening out there. And everybody is running to safeguard their position in the market, to safeguard their market share. And people are going implementation route. They're adopting, enhancing their functionalities, going into new markets, new arenas, new geographies, left, right, center. And in these cases, many a times, it is supported by shabby implementations, unrealistic and simplistic security viewpoints, not the right controls being built in place, not the right monitoring happening. And that is where we then get into the rhythm of being reactive, because there are just so many gaps out there. We're just not being proactive. We're just not being intelligence driven. We're just not aware. We're just not connected to where those cyber threats and risks might be coming your way. You need to have a risk-based view that can drive your strategy. that can explain to you how your cyber strategy governance policies can be updated, and that can also tell you how your risk register should be, kept up to date. You need to be presented a guided and a systematic approach so that your procedures and processes can all be latest and up to date, while making sure that you have the real-time data to help understand how those cybersecurity controls could be kept up to date. Because it's not about what tools you implement, it's not about what controls you implement, it's about how effective in intelligence-driven inputs you are giving there to make it look to make them effective. And that is where we present lots of metrics out there. But I'd like to wrap this up by telling you why reports like Hikvisions from our platforms present our clients an undivided and an unparalleled view, because it gives you a very clear visibility on how hackers are viewing you. Gives visibility to your leadership, helps you protect your attack surfaces, give you intelligence around vulnerabilities, as well as presents to you a clear visibility around digital risk. Help you understand what your enemy is. So, scenario of a Hikvision camera, you now understand what are the predicaments and how cyber criminals are looking at exploiting these vulnerabilities or exploiting such implementations. Which means the security teams can understand better. They can analyze the hacker profiles better on who are those who are actually looking to exploit such vulnerabilities and implementations. They can help analyze those campaigns which are picked up not only from dark web, but even deep web or various other forums that we track. Help you understand what enemy you are up against so that you're not shooting in the dark, as well as gives you those effective inputs into your cybersecurity controls, whether it's IOC feeds, giving you possibility around threat hunting. Hey, this is just a simple snapshot of an analysis being given out there. Those data, those numbers, those indicators, those campaigns are changing by the day. There are new IOCs being picked up out there. You need that viewpoint, real time entering into your environment so that your controls can be enriched, your data should be enriched, and you presented much more clearer visibility, understanding of what are those threats that you are up against. Therefore, it is very important for you to get a head start.